Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and thank you so much for joining me this evening. And wherever you are in the world, I send you loads and loads of love. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel and you really love cryptid creatures, Bigfoot and the paranormal, or anything that's a mystery and is something that is exciting and worth telling a story about, then this is the channel for you. So subscribe, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I'm writing to tell you all about the bayou swamp monster, which is a Bigfoot-like creature that lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. It chooses to remain elusive and seemingly invisible in the swamp or wetlands and areas of bayou. These are Pacific areas of flat land with stagnant, opaque water. This mysterious creature has been sighted on many occasions by a few of the Creole locals who prefer not to talk about their experience with this hairy humanoid beast. The bayou swamp monster is different in its descriptions that you hear of the traditional American Bigfoot, as described so often in documented testimonials. It seems that the bayou swamp monster has adapted both biologically and physically to the marsh-like environment that it inhabits. Many traditional Bigfoots appear to have wider 16-inch feet when fully grown, whereas this creature has a narrower foot, equally as large in length, but narrower in width, with 3 clear toe imprints that appear to be webbed between each toe. I was to learn about this strange creature from an old Creole Cajun friend of mine who grew up in the 50s and has sadly subsequently passed away. He was a very special person. He shared with me so many stories of his life growing up around the marshy wetlands, many areas that can only be accessed by boat or canoe. He wished to share with me some of the extraordinary experiences he had growing up in this vast area of marshy wilderness. He also revealed to me some of his mysterious, unexplainable encounters that frequented his life growing up in Louisiana. So this is the story that he shared with me over 30 long years ago, in his own words, as I so vividly recall. I was 12 years old at the time, with an unrivaled and unbridled spirit of adventure and passion. I was to learn from a young age how to navigate a boat, because there is no earthly way to get through this impenetrable marshland without one. Sometimes using a boat, especially if the water is shallow in parts, can present a real challenge due to all the marshy plants and bulbous knotty roots that dwell beneath the watery surfaces. These gloriously beautiful exquisite wetlands, with their vast circles of pretty green algae carpeting the water in thick veils of moss like beautiful fabric, are just wonderful to behold. Then there are the beautiful water lily-like plants, including the May plant, with its pretty white flowers that rises above the surface, creating an artistic palette of beauty. Let's not forget the trees that grace the watery landscape, with boughs laden with beautiful green leaves that skim over the silvery surface like creeping willows, making the wetlands a picturesque sight to behold. Better still, the marshes are teeming with vibrant animal life, such as otters, muskrats, beavers, catfish, turtles and alligators. And then there are also deer living there, wild pig, possums and armadillos. As a young boy, I loved and adored it all, and spent most of my time fishing as well as exploring the wetlands. One day I smelt this disgusting wet dog-like smell that was so pungent and odorous. I went to investigate where it was coming from because I was always curious by nature. As I explored the wetland, I came across all these cypress branches that were piled on top of each other with layers of Spanish moss in between, and I realized that something was using this technique to cover up a huge half-eaten carcass of a hog. I could not imagine what animal could have buried its prize like this, because this was done on drier land, so something heavy and clearly bipedal was lifting up those branches and stacking them on top of each other. And there was no animal living in the marshes capable of this kind of behaviour that I knew of. I always studied the animal scat and foot markings around the bayou, My Creole Cajun friends would tell me that I was born to be a tracker, because I knew what every animal marking was and how recently the animal had been in the territory. I came across 3 narrow big footprints that were 15 inches long, with 3 digital toes, and between each digit it was webbed like a duck. It was then I knew with a certainty that I wanted to find out what this mystery bipedal creature was with the webbed feet. I visited the area very regularly to see if I could locate this mystery creature, but I did not see anything for a long time, until one day I smelt the strange smell again. I heard the rustling sound that sounded like there was a struggle that was going on between a hefty creature of some kind. So I crept towards it to see what was going on, and then I saw it. It was this huge, monstrous, hairy, ape-like humanoid creature wrestling an American alligator, and the alligator was losing this ferocious battle. Do you realize how strong you have to be to take down a large alligator? Well, I assure you this monstrously big bipedal creature had no problems in killing this alligator at all, which was no match for him. I saw it sitting on this alligator with its huge muscular buttocks in a very low squatting stance, putting his full body weight on the reptilian body, and with his massive hands and sausage-like fingers, he immobilized, dislocated, and broke the jaw, and seemingly suffocated the creature. Until that moment, I had thought and assumed that the most dangerous predator in the bayou was the American alligator, whose only other foe was another alligator like himself. But clearly I was wrong. On this occasion, I only saw the back of the creature, but he was about 9 to 1,000 pounds and 10 feet tall. He was covered in grey hair all over his body, and the back of his head looked like a mass of messy hair. Also, this thing stank to high heaven and had a musky, skunk-like odour. I was grateful it did not turn around to see me watching it, because I knew that uncanny display of violent strength that I had just seen, that this thing was incredibly dangerous. He had a very powerful presence about him, and I guarantee that there wasn't an animal on the bayou that wasn't terrified and intimidated by him. I watched the bayou swamp monster dragging the dead alligator with one hand across the moist ground, and I knew at once what he was doing, and I knew what he would be dining on that night. After the encounter, I was terrified of this monstrous hairy beast, and I made sure that I always carried a rifle with me at all times, every time I ventured out on my boat. Despite my terrible fear, I was still incredibly fascinated by this thing, and told my father what I had seen. I thought my father would dismiss my account and laugh at me, but in our culture and living around the swampland, many of our people have seen strange things that they could never explain. There are also reports of supernatural encounters and ghostly sightings, because New Orleans has quite a rich, vibrant history behind it. My father encouraged me to go and visit his friend who had an encounter with the bayou swamp monster. When I spoke to his friend and told him about this creature killing an alligator, it was not a surprise to him at all. He said one time that he was out in his boat, he saw the bayou swamp monster swimming in the water and witnessed its humanoid head bobbing up and down like a person swimming breaststroke. He said at first he was so shocked and he thought it was a massive humanoid otter, because this creature swam with such effortless grace and agility. He watched the creature crossing to the other side of the swamp, and he had the shock of his life as he witnessed the creature climb out of the water and rising to the surface like a monstrous giant. It started to shake its coat like a shaggy dog, raining down large droplets of water all over the ground. He said this thing was monstrously huge. He was so paralyzed and immobilized by fear, and the creature just turned around and held his gaze for a moment with these dark, soulless eyes. And he said he had never been so shaken up by anything in his entire life. Then the bayou monster opened his mouth and wailed like a howling wind that sounded eerily supernatural. He said he was so freaked out by the experience that he suffered anxiety attacks for months after the event, and it was a long time before he ventured out onto the swamp again. And when he did, he was always accompanied. I did ask many of the local people at the time if they had heard any wailing sounds or seen any sightings of the bayou swamp monster. Most were reluctant to share their stories with me, but judging by the frightened looks on their faces, they told me all I needed to know, and that some of these people had indeed had sightings of this hairy, humanoid, elusive beast. It was clear that they would rather not share their stories with me, least of all a busybody like myself, asking all kinds of awkward questions. One very grey-haired, haggard-looking fisherman, whose leathery skin had seen way too much sun, told me that he had also seen the beast, when one day in his boat he nearly ran directly into the strange creature swimming in the swamp that was so agile in the water that it swam as beautifully as an otter. He saw this huge elongated head rising above the water like a human head, with a crinkly wet hairstyle surrounding its face that looked like a human perm. This thing, whatever it was, swam towards him and started to shake his boat very aggressively. He was almost certain the creature was either trying to scare him or capsize his boat, and he said everything in the boat was vibrating and shaking. In a moment, a couple of his large dead fish bounced off the floor of the boat and landed in the water, and the creature seized them with his huge hairy humanoid hands that were massive in width and size. I've never ever seen such a massive hand in my whole life, he told me in horrid recall. The fingers were so big, they were like sausages. The creature swam away with my dead catfish, but that was a small price to pay to see the back of him. If I never see the monster again, it will be too soon, that I can assure you. My fascination about this strange bipedal beast grew and grew, and I spent many long hours on the bayou seeking out this creature. I have never known something so elusive and difficult to find as the swamp monster, but my determination for an encounter with him finally paid off, but on a day when I was least expecting it. It was on a Sunday morning, and I was on my boat watching the area of bayou close to where I believe this creature hunted and stalked its prey, and possibly even nested. The first thing I noticed was a skunk-like wet dog smell, and then I knew he was around, and my senses were alerted. I suddenly felt uneasy, and I got the distinct impression that something was watching me. I could feel these steely, hostile eyes on me that were both intimidating and exceedingly menacing. I was not going to allow the overwhelming, paralyzing fear I was experiencing to rob me of an encounter with the beast. My impression was that this creature uses his provocative, hostile presence as a powerful tool to terrify his prey. The prey inevitably becomes immobilized by fear and ends up as a sitting duck for this predator, ensuring an easy kill. After all, most creatures like an effortless hunt that requires very little energy consumption, and being that this creature is seemingly highly intelligent, he will invariably use every tool in his box to his advantage, just like a human would. I just stood on my boat, staring out over the wetland, refusing to be afraid of this thing. And then I heard that horrible wailing sound that sounded like a howling, creepy windstorm. It was so awful it had the hair at the back of my neck standing on end. I wondered whether the sound was also another tool that this creature was using to intimidate me, because believe me, it was working. I could see all the ducks and waterfowl on the bayou flying away swiftly when they heard the ghostly wails, and it seemed like all signs of animal life had but fleeted. I saw a couple of alligators who had been happily sunbathing on the side of the bayou, making a hasty retreat back into the water, and even a large eagle who had been perching on a cypress tree branch, scanning the water for a potential fish dinner, took off and flew away with its powerful wings. It seemed like the whole swamp had become eerily quiet and still, so much so that the beautiful atmosphere was now replaced by a menacing, cold, unfriendly ambience. Was the creature trying to lure me away with his wails, I wondered? Anyone who heard this creature wailing was totally terrified of the thing and would always flee. And that is exactly what this creature wanted me to do. But that was not going to happen because I could see through his crafty tricks. I stood my ground and stayed on my boat, waiting for this creature to show itself. And then it did. And believe me, I did not really believe it would happen, because this creature is secretive and elusive and hates to be seen, especially by humans. He would rather that humans remain oblivious to his existence. This huge, monstrous, elusive creature stood there larger than life, staring at me with enraged brown eyes, and he let out the most terrible low guttural growl, curling back his lips to reveal a set of monstrously huge human-like teeth. The creature's hair around its face was a mass of messy curls that almost looked like a full afro hairstyle. The face was so human-looking, with brown eyes wider apart than a human being, and a very flat, big nose, and a huge mouth with thin lips, and the body was just a mass of grey long hair that looked tangled, matted, muddy, and full of green Spanish moss that was weaving its roots through the creature's hair, so he rarely blended into his environment almost with perfection. It was like he was a walking ghillie suit. The only thing that would give him away to his predators was the smell that was always evident when he was around. The creature started waving his fists at me angrily, and then he made a mock charge towards my boat, and I decided to go as quickly as I could. I had seen all I needed to see, and I was thrilled. I now knew that the bayou monster was indeed real. Were there others, I wondered? There had to be. But these creatures knew how to conceal themselves and blend into their environments with flawless perfection. I was in no doubt that if anybody had a random sighting of the creature, they would never be sure of what they had actually seen. And they would wonder if it was a possible trick of the light or their mind playing tricks with them. Nowadays, if you go to New Orleans, Louisiana, I do recommend you take a wonderful airboat ride through the marshy swamps, which is so beautiful to behold. But I can promise you this, you will see alligators and other animals, but I guarantee you few will get to see the bayou swamp monster, because even though he is around, he definitely does not want you to see him. Well, that was the most fantastic letter. Thank you so very much for it. And I just want to say that, you know, it's incredible the amount of sightings that people are having in Louisiana of these swamp monsters. And it does seem that there are getting to be more sightings because a lot of the natural habitat is now becoming increasingly more inland. So until next time, goodbye and good night.